Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss another Rishi Sunak Brexit policy which has been doing the rounds. One which would suggest that the Conservatives are starting to warm the idea to some freedom of movement after all. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, with a clear momentum in the polls towards the public wanting to join the EU, it's worth identifying just what are the main sticking points for the pockets of wavering resistance to the idea. Because if we can address the concerns of reasonable people, then we've cracked it. Politically, the most difficult concern is the reopening of old Brexit wounds. I've talked about this a lot. The Brexit debate, or slanging match as it ended up being, did a lot of damage to people's relationships with friends and families. The public don't want that. So until there's a critical mass of support for a common approach, full membership being the end goal, politically impossible for any party to present themselves as the ones who want to set family members against each other again. So how to get that critical mass? Well, freedom of movement is one of the major sticking points. However, now that people are starting to see that abolishing freedom of movement meant impairing their freedom to move, former supporters have started to be a little bit more nuanced in their attitudes. Oh, we didn't necessarily mean all freedom of movement, you know. I still want to go on holiday. So reasonable people sort of know that whatever freedoms we want needs to be reciprocated, which opens the way for getting back on the path towards freedom of movement in stages. Baby steps towards an end goal are always easier to achieve than an all or nothing approach. So quite a long time ago now, Labour proposed something on this approach related to performers. It's how they initially talked about it. People said, well, the EU will never go for it. It's, maybe we don't know until we talk seriously about it, but it would be a good way to kickstart the move towards freedom of movement a bit at a time. And it's taken a while to catch up, but the Conservatives seem to be pursuing this idea as well. In their case, as they're not bothered about performers, the focus is on younger workers. Rishi Sunak's government is pushing for what they call youth mobility schemes. Now, some people may look at that as cherry picking, but as long as there's mutual benefit, it's not. It's just a bilateral agreement. They exist. And there are EU countries who are keen on this idea, as keen as we are, in fact. It's only the Tories' past behaviour which seems to be any sort of barrier right now. According to reports, the Tories are keen on this. We know that Labour are keen on it. EU countries are keen on it. It's also possible to arrange agreements like this with individual EU countries. You don't have to do it with the whole bloc at once. I talked earlier this week about the way Rishi Sunak was trying to negotiate with individual EU countries about the standards controls. No, that is something you have to go to the EU Commission for. But something like this isn't. Individual EU countries have got similar deals with third countries around the world. It's not an EU issue, so it's all fine legally. So then there are two very pertinent questions to ask. First, why have the Conservatives suddenly changed their mind? They had this incredibly zealous attitude to any freedom of movement. There was no suggestion of seeking limited forms of mobility when Boris Johnson was handling things. And the second question is, why aren't these agreements going ahead if everyone seems to be in favour? So the first question, why are the Conservatives keen on linking our labour market with those in the EU? Well, even given that their focus is on young workers, it's still incredible. After all, these are the same Tories who scrapped Erasmus, a decision which only made sense if you actively wanted to stop young people, particularly from ordinary backgrounds, immersing themselves in European cultures. If these agreements could be actioned, we'd be back to the days where young people at least could take a year or two to live and work in another European country. Quite the turnaround from the Tories. Well, the reason is, of course, nothing to do with wanting young Brits to work abroad, but wanting to attract young Europeans to work in Britain. Apparently, there's a terrible shortage of au pairs. This is like a Tory nightmare. There's also economic reality, hospitality and farming sectors in particular, struggling with the lack of migrant labour available to them. So the Tories have decided that they're actually okay with pursuing a politically acceptable mutual exchange of labour. And by targeting the proposal on young workers, which is quite common when countries agree to schemes like this, then they can still insist that freedom of movement remains abolished, which is true because these proposals are not really freedom of movement. They're just easier movement to work for some limited number of people. Because despite what the Tories say about various global factors, in order to distract from our terrible economic performance, they know that Brexit is creating a terrible economic performance. They have economists advising them of the realities. They're not all as hopelessly inept as Minford. So it's clear why the Tories are moving in this direction. Economic consequences demand it. And for those more than a little uneasy with Labour's Brexit position, I will just point out the same reality will apply to Labour doubly. The mainstream media are rarely linking economic pain with government policies. They're more than happy to toe the party line and blame outrageous fortune. It's just that the Tories are still wanting to do something because they know that that won't last forever. But this will never be the case with Labour in power. So Labour are going to have to deliver in a way that voters can see and feel, because the media are going to bash them for any damage. But anyway, economic reality is the why. So what's the hold up? So both parties that can credibly form the next government want this, Labour and the Conservatives. In point of fact, I'm not aware of any party in Westminster being opposed to it. There are some governments of EU countries who are interested as well. These schemes are not ones which need the approval of the EU Commission, so it's very much a talk to governments on a country-by-country basis. However, there is a political difficulty in the EU, and it is the Brexit dimension. Let's say we'd never been members of the EU. We'd toddled along, we'd existed as a friendly third country off their northern coast all this time, and then suddenly we went, do you know what? These youth mobility schemes sound fun. We'd like to engage with that, please. There would be no problem. But according to the Financial Times report on this, although the EU Commission don't need to play a role in this, they have suggested that individual EU governments hold fire. There seems to be a fear that the Tories are only doing this to get a load of cheap young labour into Britain, and that any EU citizens taking part in the scheme may find themselves without the same employment rights as, say, British citizens, which is probably true. So the main stumbling block in getting agreements like this seems to be what the FT article describes as a bean counter approach from the Tories. And we've seen this same attitude with Horizon. The way is clear for us to join, but there's a hold-up. And that is because some Tory Brexiteers are not keen because we're going to be net contributors. Well, which is true. Some people have to be net contributors, but they're not considering the wider benefits. You know, we rely on our scientific research centres in this country, and Horizon membership will help us boost other research in the UK, because without it, we start to lose our academic research hubs. Well, the same attitude is poisoning these efforts as well. Because the Tories are thinking only of what they want and not what the reciprocal arrangements are, it's like they're being as tight-fisted with every concession as possible, which means we're not going to get an agreement. Why not just propose what is a fairly standard cookie-cutter agreement along international norms, fully reciprocal rights within the terms of the agreement? You know, maybe it's because too many Tories at the top of government simply have no sense of empathy. It doesn't enter their minds. Well, we want this. What do they want? Do they ever ask the question, what do they want? You know, it's like they get the information from officials. Oh, Minister, yeah, Spade's really keen on this. And then they don't think any further about what's needed to persuade them to actually go ahead with it. They just think, well, they're keen on it, so they'll just accept it. So we appear to be in a situation where the Conservatives, they're starting to abandon some of their ideological Brexit baggage, which is good. But it'll probably take a Labour government to actually get it done. Ministers who will recognise that in order to get agreements from others, you actually have to listen to the other side and think about what they want in return. Still, the effort from the Tories bodes well. And I keep saying there is no prospect for the EU taking any attempt to join again seriously until the Conservatives are on board, because what is the point of negotiating with a Labour government? Tories come straight back in, wreck the whole thing again. It's worth noting that their Brexit position has not been stubbornly fixed, even in government. The Tories have changed a great deal during the course of this year alone. And the thing about political attitudes, there's way more pressure on them to change when you're in opposition. Because when you're in opposition, by definition, what you did was wrong. So you have to sort of face up to that and go, well, we need a different approach here. Now, granted, I think after the next election, that different approach will be more Brexit crazy. But there will come a point where they have to think to themselves, maybe the problem is we're too Brexit crazy. So the next few years could be quite interesting. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.